And Good Morning Kenya gets to continue. Thank you for staying with us. My name is Vivian Ndegwa. And right about now, we get into a conversation that is on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And we are looking at the state of both in diversity, equity, and inclusion in Kenya. And joining me for that particular conversation is one Dr. Mureithi Ndegwa. Dr. Mureithi is the Executive Director and CEO of the Kenya Institute of Management. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you on board. So if we may just begin first by looking at it, generally or all round. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what exactly are we looking at?
Thank you very much, Vivian, and good morning, viewers. I think the key thing when you're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI as people normally call it, is all about fairness and inclusion. Having a workforce that is diverse, that is inclusive, where the environment also people feel that it's conducive for working.
Yeah, so there's a report that was recently dropped, rather released. There's a report that was released last month in March. No, last month was April. I'm still in April. So it was released in March, and it was on this exact conversation, the state of both diversity, equity, and inclusion in Kenya. What are some of the things that you'd say came out or were part of this particular report?
All right, thank you very much, Vivian. I think, firstly, let me just give a background in the sense that as KIM, we've been tracking both diversity, equity, and inclusion since the year 2012. And so every 2 years we release a report. So the previous report we had released was in 2021. Unfortunately, we didn't release this report in 2024. So that's when we released it in March. What is important to note is that since 2012, when you look at the aspect of gender parity in the boards, there's been a continuous growth. Because in 2012, when we first started tracking, representation was only at about 12%. But in the report that we released in March this year, the parity was at 35%. However, let me give a rider. In 2021, it was at 36%. So we see 1% drop, which is significant in our view, because certainly we should be seeing a growth trend as opposed to a drop.
Yeah, so if we can just, look at that, the drop in the number of women who are, in that top management, because the board is like the top management of any institution or company, from 2021 being 36% to now 2024, there's a 1% drop. Clearly, it's something that should be concerning because as it is, we're looking at, advancing and not, getting such drops. So maybe what are some of the challenges or what are some of the reasons that may be causing this kind of drop?
We think in our view that, there was a lot of talk about, and there was a lot of work that was being done in terms of ensuring that policies are put in place to ensure that there's diversity, both at the pipeline and also at the top level. But we see a case where perhaps there's a bit of a slackening in the last couple of years. And I think post-COVID, this is where the challenge has come in, because post-COVID, there seems to be a slackening, a pullback, that it's all about, there's no need for us to engage in diversity, which is not correct. And we also see a case where that drive, that push that was there, perhaps there's a bit of a slackening. And I think the question that we are asking ourselves, and even when we are launching the report, we are saying, is that we need to maintain the momentum, because even at 36%, it's still way below what is actually specified in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially goal number 5, which talks about women and youth in terms of parity, in terms of equity. So there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done. And I think the essence for us was mainly to, once we launched the report, we also sensitize the public, we also sensitize the people in senior positions that there's need for us not to slacken back. There's need for us to maintain the momentum so that we can continue the upward trajectory to reach the ultimate 50%, which is the minimum level.
Yeah, and if we just get into maybe policies, do you feel like there are enough policies? Are there specific policies or guidelines that actually promote board diversity?
Well, let me put it this way, that in a lot of organizations, especially those ones that participated in the research, the awareness is there.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of them also said they have policies that guide diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you know, having policies is one thing, but doing is another thing. And that's a reason why we are saying that it is important that we maintain this momentum so that we are not simply just saying the policies are in place. It's a good thing to do. It is certainly not just a good thing to do, but it's also a human rights issue. There's no way you can leave out 50% or a certain percentage of your population, yet when you look at the population, it's almost 50-50. So it's, I would say, to answer the question, policies are in place in a number of organizations. Awareness is also in place, but I think it's a question of that drive to ensure that they do as they say.
Yeah, the implementation.
Absolutely.
So we are not short of policies.
We are
they
not
are
short of
there, they're
policies.
in place.
Yeah.
It's just the implementation that maybe sometimes
Absolutely.
that's where we're slacking.
Absolutely.
You know, is there a way is there a particular way of measuring, you know, the performance at the board level?
Yes, there are. Okay, let me generally speak in terms of the board performance measurement.
Yeah.
There are lots of companies out there that will come and tell you they can help you in terms of measuring the board performance, whether it's in terms of decision making, in terms of agility, in terms of aspects like how quick they are in terms of decision making and so on and so forth. So yes, metrics are there.
Yeah. Are there specific ones for DEI, for
Yes.
diversity, inclusion, and equity?
Absolutely, yes. There are specific measurements, criteria for DEI. One perfect example is by an author called Lee, I think Jordan or something like that. And I think he talks about apple pie, where A stands for attrition, then P is performance, then the other P is problem solving, etc., including even aspects like inclusivity and so on. So he gives a model that talks about 7 different metrics. Some of them are quantitative, others are qualitative. But using that model, one can easily be able to measure the board performance as far as, or the organizational performance as far as DEI is concerned. Yeah.
So there is a way of
There is a
measuring
way of
that.
doing it, yes.
You know, you've mentioned like that from the report, you know, there was the decline, maybe the decline in women in these positions
Yes.
at the board.
Yes.
How about, what about the youth? You know, is this something that is also something that came out off of the report? You know, do we have young people as board members? You know, matters age. When you talk about inclusion, age also has to be there, and diversity.
Absolutely.
So what of age?
Thank you very much. Now, thank you so much again, Vivian, for bringing that question. Now, in terms of the review that we did, we looked at several variables. One of the variables which you've mentioned quite rightly is gender parity. The other one also we looked at is age. We also looked at education. We also looked at the profession. We also looked at the religious inclination. We also looked at aspects to do with whether there are persons living with disability in the board and so on and so forth. So there were very many metrics that we looked at. Now for age, it was actually a very interesting phenomenon because we saw that only about 19.4% of the boards have people of the age we would call youth in terms of representation. And this is quite something that will say a lot of work needs to be done. Why do I say this? If you look at the Kenyan population, we are told about 75%
Are they youth?
are the youth,
Yeah.
from ages 18 to 35. Now, if the average age of the board members, chairpersons, from our research is 46, then you see there's a very significant proportion of people that are being left out. And this is the youth, the Gen Zs, and so on and so forth. So a deliberate effort needs to be done to include or to bring in youth into the C-suite, then prepare them so that they can take leadership positions at the top level, so that we also have that aspect of the youth being represented as opposed to feeling like they're completely not represented. Then there's a question you raised in terms of, is there a benefit in bringing the youth? Yes, certainly there's a lot of benefits in bringing the youth. Look at aspects to do with innovation and creativity. Who is better to bring in innovation and creativity?
Of course, the youth.
Of course, it's the youth.
Yeah.
Look at the way the world is moving in terms of technology. Who is more technology savvy? Again, it's the youth.
Yeah.
So we are missing out in bringing a very critical group that should be part and parcel of decision making in organizations.
Yeah. Why is that so? Why are we lacking, you know, younger people in this management? Like, what is exempting the young people from getting to those, you know, those positions?
Very nice question. Let's look at it from this perspective. One is that the boardroom in most organizations, usually it's a case of maybe old boy network or old gun network. So Vivian knows Moredi, and she says, oh, I think this guy can do well in my board. So she calls me, or I call you. Instead of looking at the critical skill set that you require, a lot of organizations, it's a question of the network of people that they have. That's one. Number two, there's also the aspect of lack of deliberate efforts to bring in diversity by bringing the youth, by bringing people who are different orientation in terms of maybe in terms of disability and so on and so forth. That aspect is lacking in a lot of the boards. And then thirdly, there is also the aspect also of a lot of times boards are looking at bringing people with certain experience. Exactly. But you ask yourself, a Gen Z who is maybe about 25 years old, he or she may be left out, not because they cannot perform, not because they cannot deliver, but because they are seen not to have the requisite skills. Then again, there is a story that is told about the peacock and the penguin. Penguins, you know, they are white with black. So in the boardroom, when you bring in a peacock who is colorful, you feel like, this is not one of us. So there are all those aspects. I hope I've answered the question.
You have. And, you know, the issue of experience, I feel like this is something that, even as we talk, you know, as the youth, this is something that comes out. You know, you're qualified, you've just come out of university, you have the skills, you are, you know, you are a smart person and all that. But then when you get into the job market, or try to get into the job market, you know, the biggest disparity sometimes is that experience, because you find that there's this position, but what they want is, yes, you have this qualification and this, but then when it comes to the experience, they want someone with 10 years experience. Where are we supposed to get
Where are you going to get that from? Yes, indeed, that is actually a very big challenge, because sometimes you find that, especially in the world today, especially in the technology-related companies, agility is very, very key. Things are changing so fast. I mean, we are now talking about AI in a lot of institutions, in a lot of the working of today. Now, tell me, the older person, are they really likely to change and switch into technology as easily as a young person would do? So even when you talk about experience, yes, the experience is okay, but you need to also talk about the ability of the person to switch to the new environment, because we are living in a very competitive environment.
Is there a way we can change that? Or are there maybe measures, you know, looking towards that?
Yes. I think there are ways that we can do that. Firstly, let the organization be aware that there is a need to bring in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And research has shown that organizations that embrace DEI, they outperform others. 2, they are quicker in terms of problem solving. 3, they embrace innovation and creativity much more. And fourthly, even things like agility, technology, and so on, they're able to embrace. So the research clearly shows that there is a need for us to embrace diversity. Now, in terms of how to do it, in my view, I think one of the things that we need to do is ensure that when you are hiring people for the board, you do it in a competitive manner. Open it up. Again, also, make very deliberate steps to say that the skill set I require may be this, but I also need to diversify my board by bringing in somebody with youth, or who is a youth, somebody maybe who is also a PWD, or somebody who is maybe has a certain aspect that may not necessarily be available at the current level. That's one. Number 2, the pipeline is usually a challenge. We see when it comes to the C-suite, there's almost some high representation of women in that aspect. But as the pipeline goes higher, as you climb the ladder, the pipeline gets narrower and narrower, more or less like a cone. So much so that by the time you reach the top, like what we've seen now is that in our research, only 23% of chairpersons, 23% are CEOs are women.
globally it's only 6%.
23. Globally is 6%.
6% globally, according to research by Deloitte.
Yeah.
So you can see clearly that a deliberate effort needs to be done so that as the pipeline is going up, instead of going conical, we change so that it can go vertical or it can even increase. And one of the things that needs to be done is encouraging the people in the pipeline, whether it's the youth, whether it is the women, or whether it's PWDs or other aspects, for people to rise up and get to those senior positions. Then when it comes to the recruitment, again, as I said, it is important to ensure that you put the metrics on the table. And you say, we deliberately need to bring in this percentage of women into our boards. And you live by that. The Constitution talks about a third gender rule. Now, how many of the boards have that, meet that criteria? So that's a critical starting point that we can also build on. Again, also, it is important to ensure that you train people accordingly so that they stop having these biases or nuances that a youth will bring problems in the board. They also need to embrace the youth and say, even as we are young at one time, and the youth will also grow old at one time. So embrace them by training them, mentoring them, coaching them, so that they can also rise up and see the need now to rise up in the ranks. These are some of the measures, but of course there are many other aspects that you can do.
That can be put in place.
Absolutely.
Let's look at education,
yes,
you know, as one of the also things that may come between, you know, the diversity and equity in these particular spaces. When you talk about education, there are different education levels, you know, from certificate, diploma, all the way to PhD. When looking at this, how do you go about looking at, you know, at education in line with DEI? Diversity, equity and inclusion.
Thank you again, Vivian. Now, there's a misconception, I think, that people always have, that the more educated you are, the better you'll be in performance. Now, what we saw in our research is that a number of the CEOs in the board survey, in the survey that we did, actually were holding PhDs. Many of them were also were graduate holders, and very, very few were below the level of graduate. However, when we did regression analysis to try and see whether education has a contributing effect on performance, the interesting thing is that when you have diversity as far as education is concerned, it has a direct correlation in terms of performance. So that therefore means that you do not necessarily have to fill your board with PhD holders or with degree holders. You need that diversity, because the way a person will see things is different from the other person. And we actually saw that the boards where there is that diversity, where you have very educated persons and also people with certificate or even diploma level, that and this is also research that this is a finding that we saw in the research. What does this mean? What it means, therefore, is that we need to embrace ourselves and embrace all aspects of levels of education. And I'm not saying that you fill your board with people who are not degree holders. Neither am I saying that you fill your board with people who are degree holders. It's good to have that diversity, because every person brings in a skill set that adds value to the institution. Interestingly also, majority of the people, the respondents we saw, they were in the area of business.
And where exactly do we draw the line between, you know, one earning this position by merit, or one just being offered because we are looking to diversify?
Very interesting. Interesting in the sense that, you know, traditions have been followed over time. So, for example, if it's an organization that has been all the time maybe recruiting people on the basis of asking people to send CVs or asking people to send the contacts of their friends, and then headhunting is done, it's difficult for them to change so that they see the need for us to, the need to diversify. But what I've seen, there are a few organizations I've seen in the media advertising for positions of boards. I know, for example, like our sponsored university, Management University of Africa, we actually sent out adverts on social media, in our website, other websites, and we said we are looking for people to join in. And then you look at all the applications, look at the current skill set, and then you're able to balance on the basis of what you need. So I've seen organizations that really go out and try to diversify by saying, let it be open to everybody. And I think the key thing then is what should we do as a country? And I think this is where we need to clearly say that the time has come not to hold things close to the chest, but to open things up and say, let the best man or woman take the position.
Yeah. Okay. I want us to look at ethnicity. You know, and this is something that has actually been spoken about during the political.
Now, if you are then selling across all boundaries, across all markets, and you fill your board with people oriented in the same tribal inclination, then obviously they're going to be thinking in the same direction, and chances are that you may not be able to take cognizance of the fact that an El Molo somewhere needs your product. And they may also not be able to see how to communicate in terms of the attributes or the benefits the benefits that product is going to give to the El Molo. So I would say, even from our research, we felt that it is important to have ethnicity diversity in the boards. Because people will normally think differently, and you need to embrace all these aspects. In any case, you are selling to the entire country, so have diversity. You may not be able to have all communities represented, because it means if you have to have every community represented, then you're talking about more than 50 people in a board. But you can have representation of the majority, in other words, those ones that are in the large group, and then also have one or two minority persons so that they can also bring in that diversity from the minority perspective. Okay.
There's another group that we have to talk about, that is the PWDs, you know, persons living with disability. What came off of the report, you know, concerning them?
Thank you. Now, it was a bit surprising in the sense that when it comes to the PWDs, we saw that 57% of the boards do not have a person who would be categorized as a PWD. Now, that is a very high percentage. In terms of awareness was there. In terms of able to access, but do they have Braille? Do they have people who can do sign language interpretation? Yet you are marketing, or you are selling your products to a country where you also have people who have disability, either in terms of sight or even in terms of physicality and so on and so forth. So we felt that it is important from the research that we talk about this, so that the conversation goes beyond simply talking to people embracing diversity from PWD's perspective. And when we also, as we almost come to a conclusion of this conversation, when you talk about integrational, you know, boards, let's look at religion. You know that Kenya, we're not just a one religion country. You know, there's Christians, there's Islams, we also have Hindus in the country, so there's Buddhists and all that. So when it comes to religion, how does that look like? Okay, interesting. Now, again, also from the research that we did, we saw representation is mainly by the main religious inclinations. When I mean the main ones is exactly as you've said. However, for the minority religions, they were hardly ever represented. Again, also, remember, again, also products sometimes can also be products that appeal to the mainstream, and products that also appeal to the minority religions. So there is also but nevertheless, we need also to take cognizance of the fact that the population is diverse, and therefore we also embrace religious diversity.
Okay, I'll allow you to give us your final remarks in just a minute or less than a minute.
Thank you very much, Vivian. I think for me, from a Kenya Institute of Management perspective, is that this research that we presented in March, as Vivian has said, it is a research that we need to get into. It's something that we need. Not just corporate, but organizations out there can embrace can embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that's the only way we can ensure that the entire population is represented, all people in this country are represented, and ensure also that as we do that, we bring in aspects of quick decision-making, agility, and also improvement of performance by embracing diversity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. This is where we end this particular discussion. That was Dr. Mureithi Ndegwa, who is the Executive Director and CEO of the Kenya Institute of Management. Don't you go too far. Good Morning Kenya gets to continue, and when I come back, we will be getting into Family Check.